It's Thursday, the 23rd of July. Good day and welcome to the BizNews Edge. I'm Alec Hogg. We like to keep our eyes on what's happening here at home, but also internationally. And there's a thread running through today's show. It showed up clearly in how the market reacted both here and on Wall Street to a wave of company news over the past 24 hours. Investors are starting to punish the big spenders and reward the cash hoarders. Complete reverse to the way it used to be. We saw it in Alphabet's numbers overnight. We saw it again in Tesla's. We saw it on the JSE this morning with African Rainbow Minerals. That's Patrice Motsepe's company. And we saw the mirror image at Mr. Price. Let's get into those details and why they matter. And then later in our anchor interview today, highlights from my conversation with Johannesburg mayoral candidate Helen Zille. Well, story one, the big one, a $200 billion bet by Alphabet, which rattled the market. Its numbers released in the small hours of the morning, our time, were extraordinary by any measure. Revenue up 24%. That's a 12th straight quarter of double-digit growth by Alphabet. Well, the company used to know as Google. Very clearly, it's back in exponential growth territory. Even more so, the Google Cloud area, where revenues surged 82%. With an order backlog now, listen to this, of $500 billion. So in other words, if they had the capacity, they could do $500 billion more business. That's quite extraordinary, and it just reflects how rapidly the whole AI take-up is happening. Search advertising. Remember, Google search, the thing that was supposed to be killed by AI, is still growing 17% year on year. That's pretty good anyway. Not quite exponential. We look at that at 20% plus, but very, very solid. Great numbers. And yet the shares fell 4% in the aftermarket. Why? Well, on the conference call, the chief financial officer, Anat Ashkenazi, announced that 2026's capital spending, in other words, what it's going to be putting into the future, is going to go still higher than the extraordinary number they announced 3 months ago. He reckons another 10 billion add to that figure. So it's now, it could be as much as $205 billion. And in 2027, it's going to be higher still. So the market, well, it knows now that Alphabet is betting big on AI. It's using everything it's got, everything in the larder, and then some. Free cash flow, that's the money that comes into the business that the company can then use either to give back to shareholders or through reinvesting elsewhere. That went negative for the first time in many years during this quarter. Chief Executive Sundar Pichai insists that the business is simply, in his words, supply constrained. The late Charlie Munger spent decades preaching to us about patience as the ultimate investing edge. Pichai is betting that patience is the one thing that Alphabet cannot afford right now. The land grab is on. I spoke to Ranmore founder Sean Peche, who isn't convinced that the market should be quite so relaxed about what's going on at Alphabet.
The capex is off the charts, and that meant that they got plunged into negative free cash flow. And this is the second quarter in a row where they haven't bought back stock because of the capex demands. In fact, the quarter prior to those 2 years, so 3 quarters ago, they only spent half what they normally did buying back stock. And in fact, they issued shares. And so here you have what you think is a very profitable business. And make no mistake, operating income was up and sales are growing and it all looks wonderful. But they are investing a lot, and they're investing. To give you an example, I think they spent $44 billion in the latest quarter. Depreciation for the whole year, so the last 4 rolling quarters, is only 25. Okay, capex is 40% of revenue.
We'll hear more from Sean later in the program. And if you want to get the full deep dive of that interview, that'll be up on BizNews in just a little while. Coming back home now, the same story played out at Patrice Motsepe's African Rainbow Minerals. The board approved a hefty 15 billion rand expansion of the Bokoni platinum mine, plus another 753 million restart of the Nkomati nickel operation. Both of those are boasting healthy theoretical returns, near 28% IRR, as they say in the investment world. Where can you put your money and get 28%? Not many places. But the ARM board feels that they'll be able to do that. The market didn't care. Doesn't care about theory. It only cares about that 16 billion that is going to be needed to do the capital expenditure at a time when the platinum group metals are weak, and payback will stretch out to about 6 years. Remember, after 6 years, it's all free. But they don't like the look of that. Well, certainly Mr. Market is not terribly happy. ARM's shares were hammered. They fell as much as 7% this morning to a fresh 52-week low. It's the same message that Alphabet got overnight. Spend big today, and Mr. Market wants proof of the payout, not just the promise. So if you want to spend the money, you're going to get punished. And now for the other side of today's theme, the cash hoarders getting rewarded. Mr. Price's trading update showed that group sales were up 45%, though most of that came from that highly controversial European acquisition of the NKD chain. Strip that out, and organic African sales grew a modest 3%. But still, they comfortably beat the broader retail index, and that was up by, virtually flat 0.8%. Hardly grew at all. More importantly, Mr. Price expanded its African gross margin, even as rivals, and read here, the Shoprite Group, discounted heavily. And it exited the quarter with clean inventory. So it's managing the business well. Investment community is not impressed with Mr. Price at the moment. It didn't like the acquisition of the German operation, but there's no big capex story into the future from Mr. Price, no growth at all costs narrative as we saw from Alphabet, just disciplined execution in a brutally tough consumer environment. The market's response? Calm, steady buying of the shares. And to close out the headlines for the day, back to the spenders. Tesla's second quarter numbers out after last night's New York close gave us a little bit of a shock. There was a message there for Elon Musk from Mr. Market. Revenue did hit $28 billion. That's up 26% exponential. Okay, good news. Deliveries of the Tesla cars also at a record. But operating income, and this is where Mr. Market is now focusing his attention, collapsed. Profit margins inverted from 4.1% to 1.4%. And what that means is for every $100 of sale, they used to get $4 or $4.10 of profit. Now they get $1.40 of profit. Big change. Market did not like this at all. Elon Musk on the conference calls talked up Optimus and robotaxi, the robots and the driverless cars as the future. But this time, Mr. Market was in no mood to be charmed, even by the boy from Pretoria. It sent the shares down a further 4% after hours. Sean Peche has seen this pattern before as well.
I always have a look at the big companies and see what they just look at the numbers. I haven't read the conference call transcript, or anything like that. I just look at this and it's got a $1.4 trillion market cap, and they've had 2 rolling years of declining earnings per share and operating income is down 15%, and it's on a 0.4% free cash flow yield. I go, well, why would I bother reading the results? So yeah, I just can't see how you can make money in Tesla from here.
So that's the important news from the real economy taken care of for today. Now for something completely different, but no less importance to our audience, our BizNews tribe. Johannesburg goes to the polls on the 4th of November with the rest of the country, and the DA's mayoral candidate is about as recognizable as any name in politics in South Africa. In fact, probably next to Jacob Zuma, the most and maybe Cyril Ramaphosa, the most recognizable name that we have, Helen Zille. Well, I sat down with her yesterday to talk about her campaign in Joburg, the DA's Blue Bucky Brigade that's been gone around fixing potholes without access to the public purse, something that Dr. Frans Cronje actually recommended she do. And Helen picked up the idea, as she says in the extended version of our interview, and decided that that was a very good idea, so let's do it. She also spoke about the ward vote arithmetic, and something you should pay close attention to, because many of the DA constituents, she tells us, decide that, well, the DA is going to win the ward here. Why bother to turn out and vote? She says that is really hurting the party because, in essence, you're throwing away 3 votes, and she explains why. Also, her view was that Johannesburg needs a stable government if it's going to be turned around, not another unworkable coalition. She also spoke about the fallout from the Steenhuisen-Tony Leon lobbying row. And for anyone with a stake in this country's largest city, and indeed for the South African economy as a whole, that's most of us, this is well worth your full attention. The interview is what we call the director's cut. That's the full interview. It's usually only available for premium members, and that's both on YouTube and on BizNews Premium itself. But because this is in the national interest to such a large degree, we've opened it up, and you can actually pick it up today, not just for premium members, although we hope that you will decide to support us by paying the paltry 120 Rand a month if you pay annually. That gives you so much great information that we spend our time getting for you. Anyway, that's my sales spiel done. Here are some of the highlights of my discussion with Helen. Helen, just explain that a little bit more. Let's say you are a Freedom Front supporter and you're in a ward and you've got your candidate and you know your candidate and you want to vote for them, but you know they're not going to win the election. Can you vote, if you vote for your candidate in that ward for Freedom Front, but then on the party list, if you vote for the DA, say, because they want you to be mayor rather than whoever their candidate might be, would that then be a possibility that voters should be looking at, almost like a strategic vote?
Well, people can do that. But we would really like to appeal to people not to end us up with unwieldy coalitions. There are only 2 parties that can win in this election, only 2. One is the DA, one is the ANC. For every person that gives even a ward vote to another party makes it more possible that the ANC could emerge as the biggest party. And it matters to be the biggest party. So when, let's say in your hypothetical example, a person goes and votes for the Freedom Front candidate in his ward, that'll count once for the Freedom Front and another time for the Freedom Front in adding to the grand total of all the Freedom Front votes in that ward. So we lose 2 votes through that. We lose a ward vote and we lose a second count for the total. So when people vote for a ward councillor that isn't DA, they are actually costing us a significant number of votes on the grand total, which we need to be bigger than the ANC. And we crucially need, if we can possibly get it, to avoid these unwieldy, terrible coalitions where you have to try and survive from council meeting to council meeting, where motions of no confidence come thick and fast, where you can't implement your turnaround strategy because there's always one little party who doesn't like it and always has one person who's threatening to vote the other way in the council, and then you lose. And also, we talk about coalitions as if they're a done deal in South Africa. We don't have a culture in South Africa that supports coalitions. Tragically, the ANC has introduced, at a fundamental level, the culture of vote buying in South Africa. And it doesn't only limit itself to vote buying at ANC elective conferences. As we all know, almost 400 million rand changed hands in that election between Ramaphosa and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as they were trying to buy delegates and buying their votes. But the ANC has also transported it into our councils. So they say to the smaller parties, well, you can make the ANC the biggest party, you can give us the mayor, you can give us access to all the tenders and contracts. So how much is it worth to you to go into a coalition with the ANC rather than the DA? And there is an absolutely notorious case of Proton House where they laundered money through the Johannesburg property company, allegedly to fix a building that the ANC was moving out of, or the Johannesburg council, or the Johannesburg administration was moving out of. And then they actually bought a whole lot of councillors to cross the floor, and they did that. And we had a whistleblower who told us the full story. And that's how it happens, vote buying. Now, you cannot run stable coalitions in a culture of vote buying because the smaller parties, not all of them, I must stress, not all of them, but some of them will play one big party off against another and say, well, they've offered me this, what are you going to offer me? And we don't play that game in the DA. That's corruption, and we don't do it. But then we can never hold coalitions together for obvious reasons that you can see.
Chris Pappas, he was explaining that the infrastructure budget at Little Mgeni, which is, I think he said, the 34th biggest municipality in KZN, is the third biggest in the whole province because they've been governing it correctly. And that's the kind of stat that has to get home to people, apart from the fact that they're now living in a city or in a town that is livable. What about Joburg? How much can Joburg improve, or just take the infrastructure budget, for instance?
Well, Joburg is bankrupt. Bankrupt. Joburg's expenditure on infrastructure is actually criminal. In the last year, they had 8 billion rand budgeted for infrastructure. 8 billion rand in the last financial year. They only spent half of that, 4 billion rand. Cape Town's infrastructure budget was more than Joburg, Tshwane, and Ekurhuleni put together. You have to prioritize infrastructure, otherwise your services will collapse. It's a day follows night thing, but in this case, more like a dark night following day. And people don't get that. So, and this vandalism of infrastructure it's at another level in Joburg. It really is. But let me leave that there for a moment. Let me say that Joburg only spent half of its infrastructure budget in the last financial year. And that's often because corrupt people cancel tenders if their preferred contractor doesn't get the tender. And then they start again to try and manipulate it in the right direction. And so when a contract gets cancelled for a big infrastructure project because the right person didn't get the tender, then obviously that money goes unspent, even though there's very high levels of corruption. And because there's very high levels of corruption, this is the irony. Now, in Cape Town, Jordan has budgeted in the next 3 years 40 billion rand for infrastructure, 75% of which goes to the poorest areas. Now, that is in Cape Town, Jordan Hill Lewis I'm talking about here. And we spent 4 in the biggest city with the biggest infrastructure challenge. It is criminal.
We've spoken about the good news, Chris Pappas, basically the problems, but what about the bad news? What about this whole John Steenhuisen-Tony Leon allegations that the Clean Party is actually very dirty? What are you making about all of that, and how will that impact your mayoral bid?
You know, Tony Leon started what is probably one of the first lobbying companies in South Africa. And way back to the time of Helen Zille, I remember her saying, it's absolutely amazing that we don't have lobbying in South Africa. In America, there's hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of lobbying firms. And it is a part of democratic politics as long as it's regulated and as long as it's above board. Now, what would be totally wrong would be if a lobbying company who knew a minister went to a minister and said, you have to do this for this client. Because there's no way that any minister should be able to be told you have to do this, and this is what it is. The risk is that if people aren't honest, they will be promised a kickback from the contract. And that's why you have to have regulation. You have to have proper regulation. In Tony's case, as I understand it, he was acting for an organization that was trying to get policy changed on foot and mouth disease. That Tony and his company, Resolve Communications, took the contract and they sought to lobby for the change. And when John realized that, he was furious and he saw it as a personal betrayal. But a personal betrayal is not corruption. And we've always got to understand the very fundamental difference between a betrayal and corruption. And in politics, you can't look at it in terms of betrayal because, as we keep saying, and as Jordan has said repeatedly, politics is not what happens between politicians. It's what happens in service of the voter. And so you can't go into politics thinking these are my friends forever and whatever I do, they back us. They back me. They won't. They didn't back me, as you know very well. And in politics, if people don't agree with you, even in your own party, they say so. So you can't see that as a betrayal. There's no evidence that anyone was being bribed or that money changed hands or anything like that. And I do think that we need a bill regulating lobbying in South Africa. I think that's true. But as long as there's no undue influence, no conflict of interests, all of that sort of thing, then, but there needs to be regulation of conflicts of interest and other things. And that's why I think that that's probably coming.
And that by-election win in Mfuleni in the Black Township?
That was fabulous. That was Markie Shabalala. She gave us a great win there. And Markie was just the kind of candidate we need. She's a community person, hardworking, on the ground, honest, rolls up her sleeves, and responsive. And that's what we need.
How many Markies have you got in Joburg?
Well, this election will tell, but I think we'll have some pleasant surprises on the 5th of November.
And Helen, generally for the DA, hopefully from your perspective, Chris Pappas deciding not to go to the private sector is going to bring or retain Mngeni for your party, and you'll have that at least as a majority municipality in KZN. Are there others that you see coming in KZN, perhaps others in other parts of the country?
Well,
excluding Western Cape.
We've got a big new challenge in KZN, which wasn't there in 2021, and that is MK. And MK just beat us in the national election when you disaggregated Mngeni out of the equation. Then MK just beat us. If you disaggregated Mngeni from the provincial result and you looked at the votes just in Mngeni, you will see that MK just beat us. So again, in Mngeni, every single vote will count. And, you can't say, well, Chris Pappas did a great job for 5 years and everyone loves him. And just listen. There's no such thing as a safe seat. Every vote counts. You have 2 votes counted 3 times. Don't cost the DA 3 votes by fallacious deductions that you only vote for a ward councillor. That is wrong.
That's Helen Zille, the mayoral candidate for the Democratic Alliance in Johannesburg. Or whatever your politics, her core argument is hard to dismiss. A city's fortunes are decided by the choices that voters make, and Johannesburg's collapsing infrastructure, remember half its capital budgets left unspent last year, is the direct result of these choices over the past 30 years. Cape Town's rise, Johannesburg's decline, are on Zille's telling simply democracy doing what democracy does. Whether enough voters actually agree with her on the 4th of November is what looks likely to determine the future for Johannesburg, because Helen Zille, she's in her 70s now. She ain't going to be coming back in 5 years' time to stand for mayor again, as energetic and excitable and excited as she is right now. Father Time catches up with all of us, even Helen. So go on, Joburg. You can give the Iron Lady a chance to fix what you have maybe not been able to address because of the political situation in that city for so long. Well, that's the BizNews Edge for today. Thank you for joining me. I'm Alec Hogg. For more on all these stories and a whole lot besides, you can go along to biznews.com, BizNews TV, BizNews Radio. I'm going to be back again on Monday with The Edge. Until then, cheerio. In uncertain times, good information is priceless. The BizNews Conference is heading back to the Drakensberg. Join me, Alec Hogg, from the 11th to the 14th of August for BNC 9, Champagne Sports Resort, where it all began and where our community gathers for honest conversations, smart investing insights, and direct access to some of South Africa's sharpest minds. Come and rub shoulders with the best we've got. 28 keynote speakers, 3 days. Seats are available now. Book your seat by clicking the link in the description. Start your day a step ahead. BizNews Insider. It delivers the business stories that matter every morning straight to your inbox. Sharp, fast, and free. Subscribe now.